Welcome and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining Grassroots Ecology this evening. My name is Hannah Cunningham and I help coordinate these talks. And tonight our talk is all about weeds. So many of you who are familiar with us know that we at Grassroots Ecology work with our communities to restore local ecosystems. And so managing the non-native and invasive plants on the lands we steward is a major part of our restoration cycle. This is all on our minds right now because we finished our winter plantings and we're seeing a bunch of weeds come up from the ground, or the ground is soft enough for us to finally tackle those ones that we've been seeing around. We also miss seeing and working with our community out in the field because our community usually every year helps us remove hundreds and hundreds of weeds. But we're really grateful that you all decided to spend this evening with us. So in this talk, the Grassroots Ecology staff who work alongside Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District in a number of their preserves will be highlighting the ongoing weed management in those open spaces. So you'll hear from three wonderful women who are on or in the ground that they'll be talking about tonight. So we have Claire Grist, who's project lead for our restoration on those preserves, will give us an intro to what makes a weed and how and why we actively manage for them. The next two speakers, Nina Orellana, who's a restoration specialist and teammate to Claire, and Kristen Williams, our Habitat Restoration Director, who oversees all of our restoration sites and works closely with Claire and Nina because the lands that they manage are acres and very huge. They'll talk about two restoration sites each and the weeds we prioritize there, going through like our history of management and the strategies we use and why. So we'll end with sharing some ideas and resources for how you can prevent weeds from spreading either in the open spaces that you enjoy or in your own neighborhoods. And we'll also have plenty of time for a Q&A. So have your questions, weed related, ready. A couple more points just before I hand it over to Claire is for the Q&A section and also during or while our speakers are speaking, you can add your questions to the chat and I will bring them to the speakers either as they come up. We might answer them in line in the chat or definitely during the Q&A session. If you have any questions, feel free to send them my way in the chat, and I think that is all I have. The other thing is that this talk is being recorded and we will have it available on our YouTube page where all of our Naturalist talks live. So great. All right, Claire, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, wonderful. Thanks for coming to this presentation tonight. We are excited that you're spending your evening with us. And we named this talk, We're in the Weeds. And I thought that this was just a great picture that kind of represents that really being in it there. So what we're going to be talking about today is the weeds that we work on and why. So here's another fun picture of a team of Girl Scouts removing Italian thistle. And so we're Grassroots Ecology. We're a nonprofit organization that works with the community to protect and enhance biodiversity within our local ecosystems. So that means that we really like to involve people from the public with the work that we do. And for this talk today, we're partnered with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, Valley Water, and City of Palo Alto. So I'm going to start with just like a general overview to get our understanding of weeds a little more lined up. So California is a biodiversity hotspot called the California Floristic Province. It's actually a little bit bigger than California. And we boast a Mediterranean climate dramatic geography, and it's one of the most biodiverse places in the world. And then we're going to be talking about the Bay Area, which is like a hotspot within a hotspot. And the Bay Area has so many microclimates, dramatic geography, big hills, big weather systems that just create lots of special microclimates. So today we're going to be talking about 4 open space preserves that are all located within the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains within this yellow circle down here. And I would like to say that this is the ancestral land of the Ohlone people. And for more than 3,000 years, the Ohlone people have lived here, actively tending the plant and animal populations on which they rely through stewardship activities. So the 4 parks and preserves we'll be talking about today are marked out with these little yellow suns. And these 4 parks are just part of the larger picture. Grassroots Ecology works at more than 25 parks, creeks, open spaces, urban spaces in San Mateo and Santa Clara County. So we're just highlighting 4 today. All right, so let's start with a California native plant. A native plant is naturally occurring within a specific region and has co-evolved with other components of their ecosystem. And in California, we have 6,000 plus native plant species and 1,200 endemic plant species. And endemic means they're found nowhere else in the world. And the picture here is of a monarch butterfly and its host plant, milkweed. And this is just a great example of how plants and animals have co-evolved together in an ecosystem. This next slide is just a bunch of native plants. We love native plants. And here we're just highlighting some of the diversity we have in our parks and open spaces. And everything we do when we talk about working with weeds or invasive plant species, we're trying to enhance biodiversity. So many different kinds of life is what we're all about. What is an introduced plant species? So a non-native plant is a plant that has been introduced with human help, intentionally or accidentally, to a new place or a new habitat where it was not previously found. So not all non-native plants are considered invasive, and we work with invasive plants. So an invasive plant is a non-native plant that spreads quickly and outcompetes native plants for resources. They cause harm to the environment, and we like to call these plants weeds. But we realize weeds is a very general term, and when we talk about weeds, we're talking about these invasive plant species. So why are invasive plant species bad? Well, they reduce biodiversity and they cause harm to the ecosystem. They displace native plants and create monocultures, reduce wildlife habitat, can change the soil chemistry, and can disproportionately deplete groundwater. Additionally, a lot of our invasive plants can increase fire fuel load, degrade agriculture rangeland, and reduce recreational value. So these are all the negative impacts that an invasive plant species can have. So where do they come from and how do they get here? Well, most of our invasive plants that we work with are coming from similar climates. So this map is showing in the little pink areas all the places in the world with that similar Mediterranean climate: hot, dry summers, cool, wet winters. So the invasive plants that have arrived in California typically came from one of these other Mediterranean climate regions. And how did they get here? There's a few main vectors. One is like nursery trade. So people brought the plants over for their gardens and then they escaped the garden, or in seed mixes for livestock when ranching was a big deal, or I guess it's always a big deal, but originally. And, you know, most of these are accidental and not intentional. So the next thing we like to think about when we're thinking about our weeds is just getting to know kind of the growth strategies of plants. So I'm going to be talking quickly about 3 growth strategies. The first is annual plants, the second is biennial plants, and the third is perennial plants. And I'm talking about this because learning more about how your weeds work will equip you to effectively control them much better. So an annual plant has the motto, live fast, die young, and an annual plant will complete its life cycle in 1 year. So it will sprout from a seed, it will grow, it will flower, and it will make new seeds all in 1 year. So when you're thinking about management strategies for an annual plant, you really want to prevent new seed production and deplete the existing seed bank. And our example here is the famous yellow star thistle. The next type of plants is a biennial plant, and biennial plants take 2 years to produce seeds. So the first year typically is a rosette, so like low-lying leaves that stay close to the ground, and they are absorbing energy from the sun and putting that into the root system for a whole year. And then in the second year of growth, they send up their flower stalk, or they bolt. They make flowers, they make seeds, and those seeds will start the cycle again. Our example here is teasel. So in the first picture on the left, you can see it's rosette. And then the second picture where you can see all the flower stalks, that will be the second year of those plants' life cycle. And the third is a perennial plant. Slow and steady wins the race. A perennial plant typically takes more than 1 year to produce seeds. They're alive year round, and they're always adding new growth every year. Some perennials will be dormant for part of the year, so they could look dead, but really they're perennial, so they're continuing their life cycle year after year after year. Many perennial plants can re-sprout from smaller pieces or from the root system if it's left in the ground. And our example here is the French broom. So you might have heard me mention a soil seed bank. And a soil seed bank is the natural storage of seeds in the organic matter or soil of an ecosystem. So seeds that fall to the ground, and then they're just like stored on the surface of the ground. And every plant has a different length of a seed dormancy. So how long can that seed remain viable while just hanging out in the ground? Okay, so that's our seed dormancy time. And these can range from 3 years up to more than 30 years. So when the picture's really slow. It's probably slow. Sorry for any slow delays, everybody. So when we are thinking about how to choose where we want to work, what weeds we're working on, we kind of go through some questions in our heads, not in our heads, but just questions. And the first is you're prioritizing your site. So does the site have existing high quality habitat that you want to protect? Does it have rare, threatened, and endangered plant or animal populations, or could potentially be that? Are you addressing a spreading edge? So is there a new plant invasion and it's spreading to a new place and you have the ability to stop it from spreading? Is the site accessible to humans and machinery if you're using machinery? And then us at Grassroots Ecology, we like to involve the public. So we also like to think, is this a site where people are going to see the work we're doing and want to get involved? The next thing you're going to be thinking about is which weeds you want to work on. So prioritizing your weeds the questions that we ask when we're thinking about that is this weed new to the area? Are we just seeing it pop up in our beautiful habitat? Is it spreading quickly? And is it manageable with the resources available? So if you have a weed that's spreading quickly but is completely non-manageable by our methods, we probably wouldn't invest our time in something that we didn't feel we could really make an impact on. And then once we've identified a site and identified our weeds we want to work on, we really want to think about what those weeds life cycles are. What are their reproductive strategies? What is their phenology? What is their seed bank dormancy? How did this weed get there? And will that be a recurring pattern? And then you want to think, can this plant regenerate from roots, stems, flowers, that type of thing? So you just want to know your target. Okay, so here's our map of where the sites we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to pass it off to my friend Nina, and she's going to dive into some of our site-specific examples.
Thank you, Claire. Can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Great, okay. So Claire just set us up with a great base of knowledge about weeds, and I'm going to dive into some site-specific examples and grow on that knowledge that we just gained. So this is a map, again, of the 4 sites we're going to be talking about. And like Claire mentioned, we have over 25 sites. So this is 4 that we've picked out, and we're going to talk about 1 weed per site. So each site we do work on multiple invasive plants, but we have picked one of those to highlight. So there's plenty of other work going on, but these are some particularly exciting examples and weeds that we are passionate about. So first up is Hawthorns. Hawthorns is a mid-peninsula open space owned property in Portola Valley. It is currently closed to the public, unfortunately, but the discussion of its public use is just beginning. So there's definitely opportunity to get involved in that. It is the property right across from Roberts Market on Alpine Road, if you're familiar with the area. And it's mostly surrounded by residential properties. So it's like this little slice of a preserve. So Hawthorns is a great grassland habitat. And one of the major grassland weeds that we treat there is yellow star thistle. This is a picture of some of our high school volunteers from this past summer out there pulling yellow star. Yellow star is that summer weed that you're out there in the hot sun pulling. And these gals are going at it, masks and all. Thank you very much. And they're doing an awesome job. So yellow star is a bushy spiny plant that can grow quite large in its one growing season, as it is an annual. I've seen plants that get about my knee height and probably as wide as my body, so pretty big in the right conditions. True to its name, the thistle bits are painful to the touch and find their way right through your clothing, right through your gloves, so you definitely want to be careful whenever you're pulling it. But yellow star is not even a true thistle, but is actually a type of knapweed. It is native to Southern Europe and has been here a while, since the 1800s. That Southern Europe has that classic Mediterranean climate, so it's just love in California. Yellow star produces lots and lots of seeds, making it very aggressive and successful in our grasslands. And it's a really big deal, particularly here in California, because of its ability to deplete soil moisture significantly, making it very difficult for other native plants to survive because of the lack of moisture. It's also not fun grazing, as you can imagine, putting a thistle in your mouth. It's known to cause some serious disease in horses. So it's just not loved by land managers that are using their land for grazing and can be a real issue. So why manage for yellow star at Hawthorns? So Hawthorn was a really good candidate because of a couple of reasons. First was the potential for restoration. So looking out over the grassland, you notice that there's a lot of native plants already present. That probably means there's a good native plant seed bank present. So if we got rid of that yellow star, we'd probably have a lot of good native plants coming up. Another reason was the size. I mentioned it's like the slice of preserve. It's pretty small for mid-peninsula lands, if you're familiar with their land ownings. And the terrain is pretty nice as well. It's very mowable, it's very walkable. We can have volunteers come. It's very accessible. That helps. We also have great partners. So MidPen is really invested in helping manage invasive plants. And they're really on top of the mowing plan that we've proposed. So that's super, super helpful, and having great buy-in with your partners. And we also saw this as an opportunity to get in at the ground floor and really test this method that we anecdotally had previous success with at Arrastradero, which is a preserve just down the road. And we'd seen reduction observationally, but we weren't sure like really how much we were reducing by having this mowing plan. So we saw this as a great opportunity to have a real monitoring plan in place and collect some real data. So that was also really exciting. So here's a map of the areas that have been mowed since 2017. So yes, we've been working there for a little while. That white roof building is Roberts Market. So it's really just right in Portola Valley. And again, on the smaller scale of things. But we are, and they also have like nice cut out chunks of grassland that we're able to mow and manage, which is not always the case across all preserves. Yeah. So what is our management strategy exactly? I've been throwing around the words mowing plan a little bit, so I'm going to go into that in a little more detail. So it's timed mowing followed by hand pulling of resprouts. So there's a couple different steps. Number one, we're going out there and we're doing phenology monitoring. So that top right picture is of Claire and Kristen. And we're not pulling yet, but we're physically going out into the field to check on the yellow star population and check on its phenology, which is the life cycle of the plant. Where is it in its life cycle? So like Claire was talking about those growing strategies, yellow star is an annual plant, and it kind of like a biennial plant has those basal leaves, and then it shoots up a stalk, and that's when it's losing most of its energy. So we really want to mow when it's lost its basal leaves and has bolted. So we're checking the plants, seeing when that is, and when we should tell MidPen to go out and mow. So the first year that we did this mowing program, we actually did 2 mows. So did 1 mow, and then 2 weeks later, we did a second to catch any that we missed. And for a really robust population, this is what you want to do. But as the years have gone by, we've seen such a reduction that we've been able to get away with just doing 1 mow. So that's good to know that over the years, you're not going to always have to do 2 mows. And again, thank you, MidPen. We go out, we're like, okay, we think we're going to need to mow from this date to this date. We kind of give them like a 2-week window, and they go out there and get it done, which is amazing. So after MidPen's been out there with the big mowers, we go back out with volunteers. We have a great college internship program over the summer, and they might pull a lot of yellow star with me and Claire, but hopefully we keep it fun. And we go out there and we pull resprouts. So we catch anything that the mowers have missed. So the seed dormancy in yellow star is about 3 years. So since we've been mowing since 2017, we have seen a vast reduction. So here is the data I was talking about that we've been collecting over the years. This is the mean density. So this is the number of yellow star per square meter in our monitored plots. So we're not monitoring the entire mow area, but there is a plot within the mow area that has been monitored. So 2017 is in red. You can see that density was incredibly high and then reduced dramatically the following year, and then continued to be reduced the following year. 2020 data is not in here, but it was pretty close to 1 to 0 mean density. So we continue to see a reduction, which is really, really exciting. Favorite graph. So in summary, we're super happy. This has worked extremely well. And now we have the data backing up what we've seen at Arrastradero and at other properties. We've seen a vast reduction and have begun looking at native species diversity within the grassland. So there's lots of clarkia and lupins and milkweeds, and it's amazing to see. Hawthorns is definitely a secret spot for wildflowers, just so everybody knows. And we're just super happy to have the data to back up what we've been observing over the years. It really speaks for itself. Yeah. So next on our list, we're gonna go on down the road to Foothills Nature Preserve. You might have heard of this preserve recently in the news because it just opened up to everybody in December. So recently opened, me, Claire, and Kristen love this park. It's beautiful, one of my favorite spots. Highly recommend going to check it out if you haven't already. And we will be talking about, I kind of secretly love stinkwort, so maybe one of my favorite weeds. It is a favorite and stinky plant of mine. I kind of like the smell. And this is a picture of me and Becca, and we have bags full of stinkwort, which is important to note, the bags, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So stinkwort is a fall flowering invasive plant. So fall meaning September through December, and is sticky and quite smelly. Fall is important to note as, let's think about California in the fall time. Not a lot growing, not a lot of green things, not a lot of things with flowers. So super noticeable. It's very vibrant green. I'm sure you've seen it in the past years. It loves roadsides, it loves pastures, it loves riparian areas, and it just starts popping up in early September through December. It's native to Western Europe, the Mediterranean region. Surprise, surprise. And this is another important fact about stinkwort, is that it's recently discovered in Santa Clara County in 1984, which is a minute ago in invasive plant timelines. So that's like a little alarming and something you definitely want to pay attention to when a new weed comes into your area. And also another identifying tip is we like to think that it always kind of looks like a Christmas tree. And it's just got that bright green, vibrant color that I hope is captured in these pictures. And when it is flowering, it has bright yellow flowers. So why manage for stinkwort at Foothills Nature Preserve? So like I mentioned, it's a new weed. It's very alarming. We're seeing it come in, reproduce very quickly, and start making large stands of plants very quickly. And that warrants a rapid response. Because it's an annual and the seed dormancy is only about 3 years, there's that hope that you can exhaust that seed bank really quickly and get it out of there. So that's why it is a high priority. And it's also kind of nice that it's in this season that there's not a whole other lot of other weed stuff going on in your weed season, thinking about that time. A lot of stuff is just at its end, it's already gone to seed. So weirdly, it comes in at this great window of time that we have time and resources to go out and really go for it. Another reason we're concerned about it in Foothills Park is it's using those road networks and those trails and those fire roads to kind of move further into the Santa Cruz Mountains. And that's something we definitely want to put a stop to very quickly. So high priority, try to make it stop at Foothills. So here's a map, and the stinkwort populations are mapped out in those orange blobs. And you can see it's mainly centered around trails, roads, fire roads. Foothills does have a lot of paved roads, and they also do have an extensive network of trails and fire roads. And Detrichia just loves that. Detrichia just like grows in concrete-like soil. It's really quite amazing for it being so luscious and green, and it's growing in a spot that has no moisture. I don't know how it does it. But you can also see that it's scattered throughout the park. So the Foothills Park is pretty big. And we're kind of committed to going around and checking all of these spots, and mostly all roadsides and fire roads every season because new populations love to pop up. Okay, so what is our management strategy? So this one's an easy one, as if you see it, you get to pull it out. and pulling weeds is super satisfying. That's a great picture of that was a great big old stinkwort patch we discovered, and that took us about 3 hours, I think, to do that whole little bit of road. But it was super satisfying at the end. So you can remove it by hand. If it's in that rock hard cement dirt, you might need a hori-hori or a hand matic. The good thing is it has a relatively shallow root system, so it is pretty easy to get out most of the time. And again, you just begin scouting in September, and you have to check the spots multiple times. We like to go car hiking, and we also do lots of hiking on our feet, but we seriously drive around and check all those spots, roadsides, fire roads for Detrichia, because you'll check there once last week, and then you'll check again in 2 weeks, and a whole little crop has propped up. They really like germinate and pop up very quickly. So we're just constantly checking. Another important thing to note is make sure to wear protective clothing when removing Detrichia. There's irritating oils, and I love this picture of the close-up of the flower. You can see all those like sticky glands. That's the sticky glandness that can be super irritating for some people's skin. Luckily, I haven't gotten anything too crazy yet, but I will say you have a pair of Detrichia gloves, and the gloves might never return to their original wear. They get black and tarry and sticky, and it's kind of the end of life of your gloves. As you get later into the season and you start to see the stinkwort starting to flower, that's when you really want to be bagging it. So even when you start seeing those flower heads appear, if you pull a plant out, leave it there in the sun, the plant can have enough energy to still go to flower, still get pollinated, and then go to seed. So as soon as you start seeing those flower heads, they need to be bagged, and that bag needs to go to the landfill. And that's a really important part. Yeah. So how are we feeling about this? We're going to continue watching this very closely. It's going to remain a high priority. Stinkwort is something we work on multiple sites. We're constantly finding new populations along roads, fuel breaks, trails. They love disturbed areas. So a lot of the new fuel breaks going on in the area, those are definitely of a concern to us, and we're watching them. And you just really want to remove them from disturbed areas before it continues to move around. And remember to monitor every year. Me and Claire were just walking around Hawthorns one year, and we found a patch where we had never found one before. And we're like, oh my God. And we removed it. And we're like, okay, we got to come back and check next year. So we go back the following year, and we couldn't find a single plant. So I'd like to think that we got it before it set seed and created a whole new population, and now it's gone. But, you know, that just goes to show that even if you think you're like, oh, I walk by there all the time, there's never stinkwort. This guy likes to show up where you would least expect it. So always, always keep checking. And now I'm going to hand it over to the wonderful Kristen to round out our sites.
One second, I've got you, Kristen.
Thanks, Hannah. She took away my mute power. Before I go into the next one, there was one question in the QA that is a good time to address right now, which is a little more detail on the ID of stinkwort versus tarweed, because they can look really similar. And to the point that sometimes even all of us are going up and like smelling the different plants, because stinkwort has a really distinct smell, kind of like menthol. And our tarweeds that look really similar, they are also really aromatic, but they're usually a little fruitier smelling. And that stinkwort smell is really distinct. There's also more detailed ways of doing tarweed versus stinkwort ID. The way that the veins grow in the leaves is an indicator, but that's a little bit more advanced, and honestly, sticking it up your nose is easier to ID it. And then the flowers are a little bit different too. But that's always like advanced ID in the summertime is distinguishing between stinkwort and tarweed. And it's always a scare when you're driving by a preserve and you think that you see a patch of stinkwort, and then thank goodness it's just tarweed. All right. moving on. So we're gonna head down south from where we were to Bear Creek Redwoods. And this is a newer project site for us. It's also in partnership with Midpen. And at Bear Creek Redwoods, we've been working on French broom. Here, this photo is a recent photo of some of our staff and interns. And while I don't think there's actually any French broom in this photo, the tools that they are holding is the important part of this photo, because those are crucial for French broom removal. Those are weed wrenches, and I'll talk about them more in our management strategies. All right, French broom. So Nina went over 2 annual plants, and now I'm going to talk about 2 perennial plants. So kind of a different strategy. French broom is a perennial. It's relatively long-lived. They can live for up to 30 years. And as Claire said, they keep on putting on growth. So these can get quite large. They can be up to 20 feet tall. And at Bear Creek, they are up to 20 feet tall. They are like small trees. And these mature plants produce a lot of seeds. Each flower, as it turns into a seed, can be like 5+ seeds per flower. So a mature plant can actually produce up to 10,000 seeds in a year. And so by just removing one plant, you can think about all of those little babies that you're not having to deal with in the future. But not only the fact that they produce a lot of plants, the thing that is really challenging about French broom is the seed dormancy in the seed bank. And this is one of those plants that has a ridiculously long seed dormancy. People don't actually know how long it is, but thinking at least 30 years that those seeds are viable in the soil. So this is a long game for French broom. And on top of it, because it's a perennial, this isn't a plant that you can come in and mow, because if you mow it, it'll re-sprout. So perennials, they hold that energy in their root, and they can come back if they're not fully removed. French broom is also a nitrogen fixer. So thinking about ways that it's detrimental to the environment, not only is it really aggressive and crowds out native plants, but it also changes the chemistry of the soil, which is going to make it hard for some of our native plants to survive. And then one thing that is in particular really important to talk about with French broom is that it is a ladder fuel. And so as we become more and more concerned about fire in California and out of control fires, French broom is really a plant that is exacerbating that issue, because they grow really big and they are alive for 30 years or so, but they do actually end up dying. And then they leave these really woody debris that goes right up into the woodland understory, because they grow on the edge between open area and woodland area. So they create ladder fuel up into our trees. So as if that wasn't good reason, why are we managing for French broom? Well, actually, this is an important question, because there's a reason that we are managing it, particularly at Bear Creek, because this is a plant that you really need to think about the prioritization, like Claire was talking about, because it is extremely widespread. I can guarantee that everyone in this Zoom call right now has seen French broom. It is all over the Santa Cruz Mountains. It is totally out of control. And it's a plant that's really easy to feel overwhelmed with. So you have to be very strategic when working with French broom. And we're really lucky that Midpen is our partner on this, because they're really good at strategic weed management. And so they actually identified the specific spot in Bear Creek that we're working. So Bear Creek is known for its redwoods. And actually where we're working is not near the redwoods. It's in a seasonal wet meadow in the preserve. And it's a unique little habitat, not only for the preserve, but for the area. And it's a spot that there's a good potential of having potentially rare or endangered species, such as red-legged frog or the red ribbon clarkia. So the goal here is that we're really protecting a specific spot within the preserve. And here is a map of that spot. It's a little hard to tell what's going on, but it's actually just right off of Highway 17 and Bear Creek Road. And so it doesn't look very wet in this photo, but there is a meadow right in the center where the cursor is. And that actually can hold a lot of moisture in the winter and spring. And it hosts a lot of great native plants and has that potential for endangered plants. All of the yellow is where we are removing French broom within this area of the preserve. So you can see that it's kind of circling in around on that wet meadow. So the strategy is to first remove closest to the meadow and then push it back. So we're really trying to protect that specific area. We also put the purple section on this map. I wanted to note that another organization is also out there doing a shaded fuel break along the highway, and that is removing a lot of French broom underneath the trees. And so you can kind of see there's like different areas that are being prioritized for different reasons. And also Mid-Penn has volunteers out there as well, and they are protecting other areas within the spot. So it's kind of cool that we have 3 different groups out there that are specifically working on French broom for different reasons within the same area. Okay, so what is the actual strategy? I already mentioned that with French broom, because it's a perennial, mowing, if that's your only strategy, is not going to be very effective. You could pair mowing with other things, but the most effective strategy for French broom is actually just removing the entire plant by hand or using a weed wrench. And that was that orange tool that was in the photo before. So a weed wrench is a really fun tool that is specifically designed to pull out like small trees and remove their entire root. And we do that typically in the winter and early spring, because that's when the ground is going to be the most moist and you can actually remove it. It starts getting hard and it's hard to pull out. And also that's before the plant begins to flower in around May. And so by removing the plant before it's able to produce seed, we're reducing the amount of plants in the future. Not only is our strategy in this spot to do it geographically and really protect that wet meadow, but we're also going in and removing some of the bigger plants first, because they are the ones that are really going to be that ladder fuel, and they're also going to produce a lot of seeds. So we've only been out here this is our 2nd season out at this project site. And so last year, which was a limited season anyway, and then this year, our main focus has been on those really big old growth French brooms. And so that's been our first priority, is removing those really big ones. And you can see how big they are. So here we have the San Jose Conservation Corps helping us, and the French broom are just towering over them. So I would say they are close to 20 feet tall. What we'll do is, as we remove those really large ones, there is going to be a big flush of young seedlings coming in the same area. And so we're going to go back for years and be revisiting these same areas and removing the young French brooms. One thing that's lucky is, Claire was saying with the perennials, it's slow and steady wins the race, and they do take a while to mature. So typically, it's not always, but typically a French broom takes a couple of years before it's mature enough to produce seed. So what you can do is you can remove French broom from an area, and then you usually don't need to come back to that area the next year. You can usually wait a year, so you can kind of get a cycle within a spot of removing French broom. But it's going to be a long thing because, like we said, the seeds are potentially viable for 30 years. So it's been good out there so far. Like I said, we've only been out there for 2 years. It's early on in the process, but we're making good progress. And it's really encouraging that we are working with other partners out there, including ECI, Ecological Concerns, who's doing the shaded fuel break, and the Mid-Penn volunteers and Mid-Penn staff. And so I think it's a really nice story of kind of different groups coming together and helping on like a really specific project. We're also, this upcoming year, we wanted to do it last year, but we weren't able to with COVID. We're going to be doing some overall plant biodiversity monitoring of the area to make sure that we're protecting the right spots, and to make sure that French broom isn't coming in, and really understand what exactly we're protecting. All right. Moving on to Hendrys Creek, another Mid-Penn project. And this is a site that is part of the Greater Sierra Azul Preserve, and it's a small section that is also not open to the public. And it's a spot that MidPen has really identified as good habitat that needs to be protected. And so this is more about protecting habitat and less about public access in this area. And one of the plants that we're working on there is Vinca, or big periwinkle. I usually just call it Vinca, so that's what I'll be referring to it for this presentation. All right, so Vinca is another perennial plant, and it's actually a vine or ground cover. So it's similar to French broom, where mowing is not going to usually be an effective strategy. And this plant is interesting because we've been talking a lot about seeds and seed bank and seed dormancy, but Vinca is actually considered to be a sterile plant with very few examples of seedlings known. And so this is actually spreading not by seed, but by vegetative matter. So little fragments of the plant can break off, and if they get rooted into the ground, they can grow new plants. And Vinca was introduced actually a long time ago to California for California current history in the 1700s. And it was brought over to California as an ornamental plant and a medicinal plant. And that's important to note because it is an escaped garden plant. And that's how one of the ways that it continues to be spread is through horticulture and nurseries and landscaping. And it is most commonly seen in the coast and the Sierra foothills, but we're also starting to see it more in the Central Valley, as well as drier areas of California. So why manage for Vinca at Hendrys Creek in particular? It's a common invasive plant in a lot of areas, and in particular in riparian areas, which are sensitive habitat. This Hendrys Creek project has been really exciting. It's a really big riparian restoration project or creek restoration project. And we're just one partner in it, and we're working on the vegetation component of it. So it was a project that actually was all about reconnecting tributaries to the main creek because this was an old homestead and the land had been manipulated quite a bit. And so the Vinca was brought in as part of that old homestead, but it was really taking on in the years that it was there. So one of the reasons that we're doing Vinca removal at Hendrys is that MidPen came in and did a lot of earthwork to realign the creek channel. And like I said, if you have those little bits of the plant in the ground and they get moved around, they will continue to create new plants. And so we wanted to make sure that we removed the Vinca before they did the earthwork. So a lot of the work that we did was before the earthwork was done, and now we go back and monitor. And Vinca can easily spread in riparian systems, so it's important to remove it, and it just outcrowds native plants mostly and doesn't have a healthy diversity within a creek setting. Okay, so the strategy here, like I said, mowing is not really going to work. So we do hand removal. And for the most part, that really is just putting on a pair of gloves and pulling. You can also use a shovel or a mattock or something like that if the root system is pretty deep. But you do have to have a lot of attention to detail with this plant because you have to remove all of the roots and all the little bits. There's little nodes and stolons that can easily stay in the ground. It spreads out underground, so sometimes you're like pulling up roots for a while. But it's another kind of long game because you have to go back and make sure that you've got all the bits out of the ground. This is kind of surprising. So you would think that if it is that quickly to revegetate by little pieces of plant, that you would need to bag it and throw it away. And you can do that. But we've also found that if we pile it in really sunny areas, that it can dry out and it won't reproduce. So that's one of the reasons that we usually pull it in the summertime, is that we can let it dry out before the rains come and it really kills the plant. We also remove this in the summertime because it often grows on slopes And we don't want to lead to erosion by removing out these plants right before it rains. So we do a lot of summertime removal with Vinca, even though because it doesn't produce seeds, in theory, you could remove it any time of year. And then we do sometimes, but the majority of our work is focused in the summer. And then, like I said, just a really important component of managing Vinca is monitoring and going back and checking the areas that you've worked in. It's been pretty successful at Hendrys. I think we did a good job of removing the Vinca before the big earthwork was done in 2018. We are finding some patches along the creek that we remove. There's a few isolated patches that we didn't prioritize before the earthwork, so we're still working on that. But for the most part, we're seeing a decline. It's just a plant that you have to revisit for multiple years, though. And there you can see a pile of Vinca that's drying out in the background photo. Okay, so that was, a lot of info about scary invasive plants. But the good news is we are here with some actionable items because we want all of you to help, and you can help. And you can help in a lot of different ways. The most obvious one, volunteering to come remove weeds, which I put an asterisk next to because that's kind of false advertising right now. We have pretty limited volunteer opportunities at the moment, but we do have opportunities for middle schoolers, high schoolers, and college students. So if you are one of those categories, we have some programs available. For adults, we're kind of taking a pause with COVID, but our volunteer days will be back at some point. And we're not the only organization you can volunteer with. Some folks are still looking for volunteers, but overall, volunteerism is kind of slowed down right now with COVID. But there's other things you can do even more locally than volunteering in an open space, and that is taking a look in your own garden or your backyard or your neighborhood. A lot of these plants are right outside your door, and you are welcome to go remove them. So that's an exciting thing, and it's fun to have that impact right close to your home. On that same vein, don't plant a pest. We talked about a few of these different invasive species coming in from the landscaping trade, horticulture. It's a really big bummer that some of these are still available. You can go buy them and you can plant them and they might escape out of your yard. So just be thoughtful if you are a gardener, you like to have a garden in your backyard, about what you're putting in, because you should be planting natives, which is the next one, which is more and more doable. There's so many native plants that are available in our nurseries now, just like retail nurseries, but also the Grassroots Ecology nursery. We have a native plant nursery that you can buy plants online from our nursery. So that's exciting. And we're towards the tail end of the planting season, but it's not too late. You can still plant this year. One thing that's really important is responsible recreation. And I think that's something that I'm assuming a lot of us on this call are on this call because we're excited about open spaces. We like visiting open spaces. And which is really important and great and good. Keep doing it. I love doing it, but it's important that you make sure that you're doing that in a responsible way and not spreading invasive plants. So making sure that you don't have any seeds hitchhiking on you as you leave preserves or entering preserves, either on your shoes or your pants. And then we also didn't talk in today about pathogens, but they're another form of an invasion. And a couple of pathogens that are really predominant in California right now are sudden oak death, and then another species of Phytophthora. And all of us at Grassroots Ecology, we make sure that we aren't moving around soil on our shoes, and we also spray our shoes down with isopropyl alcohol to make sure we're not moving pathogens around open spaces. And then if you're not into the outdoors, which is fine, you can also just keep on learning and being curious online or with your friends or neighbors. And we actually shared a few resources here about some places that we like to visit online that help us continue to learn. The first one is iNaturalist, which is a really cool platform about crowdsourcing information about plants, both native or non-native, or actually all animals too, not just plants. We're just major plant people. So iNat is, you can download it as an app on your phone, and you can go out and take photos and collect information about what plants or animals are out there in your community. And it's okay if you can't identify them, because the whole idea is that it's crowdsourcing, and so people will help you identify what you're finding, and you can also go help other people identify. So iNaturalist is a great resource. We use more typically at Grassroots Ecology CalFlora, which is another mapping platform. We use this in particular to track our management and also to track where we're seeing different plants. CalFlora is an amazing database, and it actually also picks up information from iNaturalist. So if you enter information using iNat, CalFlora, as long as it's approved by enough people as being correctly identified, it'll also go into the CalFlora database. CalFlora also produces these really awesome maps. So if you just Google like yellow star thistle CalFlora, the map on the left would pop up, and you would be horrified at what you see. And that's why I waited to the very end to show you this map, because it is very widespread. But there it is. There's all the known yellow star thistle in California. So big shout out to CalFlora, awesome application. And then the last resource I wanted to share is Cal-IPC, which is the California Invasive Plant Council. They're a nonprofit. They're based in the East Bay, but they service all of California. And they are just like a wealth of knowledge. We used them, a lot of their information on their website, to create this presentation today, just to make sure we were sharing the correct facts. So many things are on this website. My favorite thing to do is to look up these weed reports on certain species. So here we have a screenshot of the Vinca as well as Stinkwort. And so you can go on the Cal-IPC website. The weed reports are produced by UC Extension in partnership with Cal-IPC. And like, it's just like the perfect amount of information about each of these plants. It gives a background, it talks about the biology of them, the history, how to manage them, and then it goes into the different ways of management. So today, for each of these species, we focus on like one form of management, but there are multiple ways to manage for different species. And so these weed reports really show you all of it. Cal-IPC is just awesome. Okay, that's what we got for you. Now we're ready to hear from you guys.
Thank you, Kristen, Nina, and Claire. We have some questions in the chat, but keep them coming. And thanks both to Nina and Kristen, who are fielding questions in real time. Let's see, I'm going to back up a little bit. We had a question about, is there any effort to try to restrict the sale of Vinca or Broom in the nursery trade? Another person commented that Home Depot is also selling sweet broom.
I'm not super knowledgeable on that, but there are organizations, and I'm seeing right now, someone said Plant Right Partners. There's definitely groups that are working on this to reduce the nursery trade sales. But yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is make sure that you're not buying those plants and let other people know. But there are organizations that, and I think Cal-IPC probably does some work on restricting invasives in the nursery trade.
Nice, yeah, and we do have a number of great native nurseries in the area. Like Kristen said, our native nursery sells plants, but there's some other great local ones. CNPS usually has plant sales. Kind of on that note, was a recommendation to replace Vinca in a garden. What would we recommend? I think Kathleen mentioned Yerba Buena, which would be beautiful and nice.
Yeah, so like some ground covers. I guess if you're like a shady, looking for a shady ground, yeah, Yerba Buena, Whipplea or Modesty is kind of a companion plant to Yerba Buena. Maybe creeping snowberry
And if we were to like re-veg some of the creek banks, what would we be revegetating with?
Claire and Nina, if you guys want to jump in, go for it too. But typically with the creek re-veg, we'll do shrubs. So at Hendrys Creek, for example, we have like toyon, ocean spray, thimbleberry. We have a few like alders, oaks, so some trees. We also did at Hendrys Creek some more like rhizominous plants like stackies, mugwort, marsh baccharis, things like that that are going to help stabilize the creek banks. Those all have root systems that spread out and really hold down the soil. Because Vinca actually, because it does also do that. And so you want to replace it with something that's going to have a similar strategy of helping reduce erosion.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, someone else recommended woodland strawberry, which is also
yeah, great one.
Okay, what is the best medium-sized native flowering tree to plant in the garden?
Oh my gosh, so many options. Well, I right before this talk, I walked outside and the red buds are so beautiful right now. Oh my gosh, red buds are just great. Or ceanothus, together they're amazing. You look at them individually and you think they're both like purple, and then you look at them together and you're like, wow, there's so many different depths of purple. Flannel bush can get kind of big, but that's a really cool showy smallish shrub. Oh yeah, some things in the chat. Ribes. You won't find three people that like ribes more than me, Claire, and Nina. We will sing ribes praise all day long.
Lots of ribes love in January.
So ribes are, for those that don't know, ribes is currants or gooseberries. So we have a few different species in the Bay Area that are native of ribes, and they generally have really beautiful, showy pink flowers.
We got some great suggestions, and all of those are really excellent for our pollinators. We've got lovely flowers, lovely seeds and berries to help the birds. Oh yeah, thank you all for putting your suggestions in the chat too. That's really great. If you want to save the chat, you can just go down to the three little dots in the lower right-hand corner of the chats if you want to keep that as a record of all of those great suggestions. I'm trying to find any more questions. There was a questions about Earharta grass removal. I'm not sure. I think it was a little general, so.
Yeah, I personally don't have a lot of experience with the Earharta. It is a really challenging grass to get rid of. It's a perennial grass that grows in shady areas. And we do have it at a couple of our project sites, and we've been hand pulling it, but it really feels like an uphill battle. We don't do, one thing we didn't mention, but at Grassroots Ecology, so there's different ways that you can manage for plants. And we talked today all about mechanical methods because that's the strategies that we use at Grassroots Ecology. There are other methods that are considered cultural methods, and that would be things like grazing and using fire. And then there's also chemical methods, that'd be using herbicide. So there's a wide range of different ways that you can manage for invasive plants. And at Grassroots Ecology, because we work so closely with the community and with volunteers, we use mechanical methods because that's how we can engage people. We can't necessarily have, well, maybe we could, but like we can't really have volunteers out there like herding goats and or starting fires or spraying herbicides. So, but what's great is having partners that can do that. And so a lot of our funding partners, agency partners, they might have the ability to do these other methods. And so it's all about partnership and collaboration with weed management.
Absolutely. We have another one coming in about solarization for feral grasses. I know one example, but Kristen, you talk about the one at McClellan.
Yeah, you actually might know more about that one than me, Hannah, at McClellan. I have tried solarization for French broom, actually. I did a really small test plot at Hawthorns quite a few years ago, and it was more effective than I thought it was going to be. So solarization is using plastic to cover up the ground, and basically you're like baking that seed bank and killing off some of the plants. And French broom, I was like, wasn't really sure if that was going to be effective. I wasn't sure if like solarizing it was just going to exasperate the seed bank and have it flush a whole bunch. But it actually did kill quite a few of the French broom seedlings, and you can still like see the square plot of where we did it. My personal experience with solarization is that it was really challenging just to administer it. It's pretty labor intensive, and then also if you're using plastic, you're just bringing plastic into the environment. And even if you buy plastic that is supposed to be like UV protected and won't break down, my experience is that the plastic still broke down and I was chasing around plastic particles. And so while it was effective of getting rid of the French broom, it created a whole new set of problems for me. So, but Hannah, I don't know if you know more about the grass removal solarization at McClellan.
A little bit. So we did a kind of a similar test plot at McClellan Ranch Preserve, so that's down in Cupertino. And it's a pretty small area, but it is pretty covered in non-native invasive grasses. So this was a pretty small area because we restore that area in islands and work outwards. But there was some good success. We followed up the solarization with some pretty heavy sheet mulching, I believe. And that definitely helped keep the weeds from coming up. But it did seem to help our native plants establish faster. And we did some seeding that was also very successful. We did that like after the mulching. And those poppies, a lot of poppies came up then. So we saw a reduction, but again, it is really labor intensive and not something we will probably do. All right, more questions. We had a question about our nursery. So our nursery is not open to the public, but we are open for online plant sales. I'll put the link in the chat. So what you do is you make your purchase online, and then you can go pick it up at the nursery. So the hours are the hours of the park, which right now, Claire and Nina, are
dawn to dusk. Yeah, the usual park hours.
I'm trying to think, but it's on Palo Alto Open Space website. Let's see.
I see one question about poison hemlock. We didn't talk about that in this presentation, but poison hemlock is a plant that we do remove at a lot of our project sites. It really comes into moist areas. So I think that is a plant that, for example, at the Bear Creek location that we should be thinking about that could pop in. That's the perfect habitat for poison hemlock to come into. And that one is another one that we do with hand removal. Poison hemlock has a deep taproot, so we typically use a hori-hori, which we mentioned a few times, and we didn't actually explain what that is. A hori-hori is a Japanese gardening tool. It's basically like a gardening knife. And so it's really great for sticking it into the soil and popping out a taproot. We work on poison hemlock at Arastradero Preserve, at Burn Preserve, Foothills Park. We do remove poison hemlock. So it definitely is a plant that is on our radar, and we remove quite a bit. I saw another question about what we've seen coming in. Actually, I think that was asked from like a few different locations. And we have, I think at all of these sites have had a really great success with the native seed bank just coming back naturally. And that's like, expected. Like we said, you're wanting to protect areas that you think are going to be resilient, that have good native population. And so when we removed French broom, in oak woodland areas, we've seen ferns coming back. We've seen hairy honeysuckle coming back. We've seen some stackies, a few native grasses. And then there's already a lot of like, you know, usually French broom is coming in under oak trees. So you already have a lot of nice oak plants. Oh, a lot of yerba buena. That's really fun. Actually removing French broom with yerba buena around, and then yerba buena is a mint. And so you're walking around and then you get the smells of the mint coming up as you're removing French broom. I saw early on someone asking about what we're seeing, or if we were bringing in native perennials at Hawthorns when we removed yellow star thistle. And Nina talked about that a little bit, that actually, again, there's a really strong native seed bank of perennial grasses and some wildflowers at Hawthorns. So at Hawthorns, we've seen some grasses are California melic, squirrel tail, purple needlegrass, blue wild rye. All of those we're seeing in the grasslands. And then there's actually the last photo I meant to say at the question slide, that was at Hawthorns, and that is the lupin fields at Hawthorns. There's amazing wildflowers, lupins, poppies, clarkia, yarrow. And then, like Nina said, there was one spot where we didn't even know there was milkweed present. And the year after we removed the yellow star thistle, we saw milkweed coming up, which is the host plant of the monarch butterfly. So that little patch of milkweed felt like worth it. There was milkweed just hanging out there, and it just needed to have the water availability, I think, to grow. And so by removing the yellow star thistle, we were kind of letting there be more water in the ground. Reverse watering, I've heard people call it.
Officially. Yeah, that's great. Like Nina also talked about, in 2020, we did a round of monitoring again at Hawthorns, and there were so few yellow stars that we did some native plant monitoring. We saw all of those plants that many of the plants that Kristen just mentioned. I'm going to back up. We did have a question about MidPen and how they're funded. I know they're publicly tax funded, but Kristen, I know you do a lot with them. So
yeah, MidPen is awesome. We love working with them. So they're a special district public agency, so funded by tax dollars, and they manage a lot of the open space on the peninsula, and they are really great. They do management themselves, and they have a lot of great partner organizations like us, where we get grant funding and contracts from MidPen to help them do volunteer work days on their property. And they also do volunteer work days as well. I mean, y'all can donate to MidPen too. I'd suggest it. They're awesome, but they do get tax funded.
Thank you. Back to weeds. I had a question about burrweed, how we would manage it, which I think, are we talking about the little acne spawn or not?
Fur clover.
Fur clover, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And oxalis, and we kind of deal with those in the same places. So
those are really challenging weeds. Oxalis, that one is like, I was in a weed managers meeting recently, and almost everyone listed oxalis as like their #1 hated weed that's making them go crazy because it's so hard to get rid of. So, I mean, oxalis looks like a clover. It grows by little bulblets that really multiply. And it's another one, like if you leave one little bulblet in the ground, it's just going to come back like crazy. So it's a lot of digging up. I personally have not had good success with removing oxalis. I think few people have, but if you're really diligent, do a lot of digging and then bag them and trash them. You can't leave those little bulbs lying around. Burr clover, also kind of a pain. I have done some hand removal of it in like garden settings more. Like if we have like an area that we've revegetated as a native meadow or something, I would say it's worth removing some burr clover in there. It kind of goes along with the prioritization that we were talking about. So honestly, like both those plants, we usually don't prioritize because it's just kind of an uphill battle. It's better to focus your time on weeds that you can actually get a hold of and make an impact on removing. We can't end there. That was too depressing.
Here, Claire Elliott, hi Claire, had something to say. It really helps to pull oxalis before it blooms because that's when it usually starts making those little bulbs along the root.
Cool, thanks.
That's very hard.
Rose clover. I have not worked on rose clover.
Well, no. Okay. Oh, I'm going back up. Is there a California broom that looks like a French broom? We do have a broom.
Yeah, so we have, we call it deerweed. And some people have called it California broom, but I feel like that's not great advertising on that plant's behalf, although deerweed's not that great advertising either. So it is another plant in the pea family, and it does have a similar looking flower. It usually grows in drier areas and chaparral areas. And it's a little bit more like spindly. It has a different growth structure than a French broom or Scotch broom. It's kind of a small shrub. It's like usually maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet tall and kind of bushy. Yeah, it's bushy. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not an expert on this, but one thing that is really interesting, I didn't talk about this with French broom. Oh, another form of invasive plant control is biocontrol, which I'm not going to go into detail on, but essentially it's the idea of actually bringing the predators to the plant. So Nina or Claire talked about how the plants that we have in California came from similar climates, but we don't necessarily have their predators to keep them in check. And so one strategy is that for certain plants, the predators have been brought over, but that takes a lot of time to test those out and make sure that those usually insects are not going to become out of control themselves. But French broom, what's really exciting is we actually have, like nothing will eat French broom in California, except for one moth that I believe co-evolved to eat our other plants in the pea family in California. And then over time, actually the longer that French broom has been in California, this moth has also started to evolve to eat French broom as well. But not like it's not like the French broom's not like sustaining this moth, like we can still remove it. But it is fun when you're removing French broom and then you find a little herbivory on your French broom from the moth.
We had a question about rainfall and how that affects our work. So does the amount of annual rainfall hurt or help our weeding? Do we change our plans based on the amount of or predicted amount of rainfall?
Not that detailed, not like counting the inches of rain and changing, but I'd say that where it does change the strategy quite a bit is things like French broom, when you can only remove when the soil is moist enough that you can really pull the entire plant out. So if it's a big drought year, it really limits the amount of time that we can spend on French broom. And then there are, I don't know like the strong details. There is like, that does affect the phenology a bit of like when it's going to bloom. It's not like across the board, like, oh, low rain, everything's going to bloom earlier. It doesn't necessarily work that way. So it's all about adaptive management and just going out and monitoring your locations and checking up on them. You saw the photo of us. We go out and we look at weeds and we see, are they ready to remove? Do we wait a little longer? Do we need to get our gloves on right that minute? So a lot of what we do is just, going out, checking and taking action at the right time based on what we observe in the year.
Sometimes it's right then. Get the horis out and dig it up. Let's back up to, there was a question about, is there a weed book that we would recommend? I know Cal-IPC has the Weed Workers Handbook, which is pretty cool. I can link that, send it out with our resources. but if y'all have any suggestions.
Yeah, there's, it might be what you're referencing. So essentially on that last side, the sheets that I showed, nice. Yes, that is a great one right there. That is actually the mini version of a bigger book. So that's the in the field plant cards.
Can you describe what's the title?
I'm like, should I go grab mine off of my bookshelf? I forget exactly what it's called, but it's produced by UC Extension. Weed Pest Identification and Monitoring Cards by UC Extension. And so that is the mini hand version of a larger 2-volume set that UC Extension has. And those are kind of known as like the California Weed Bible. They are large books. And honestly, you can find all of the information on the Cal-IPC website. So that's what I do, is I Google like French broom Cal-IPC, and then the Cal-IPC page pops up, and then it's a link on there. So that is really, that UC Extension information is what land managers go to for their source. Thanks, Claire.
Yeah, we got some other great recommendations. All right. I think maybe we could review, there was a question about what makes it a weed versus a native plant. We did talk about this a little bit, but why not? Run through it.
Claire, I'll let you take this one.
All right. Okay. A weed or an invasive plant will outcompete our native plants. So it's a plant that will take over an ecosystem and create like a dense monoculture. So picture a field of corn. That is a monoculture. So you have only one type of plant. And it, you know, when we think about biodiversity and ecosystems, we think about balance. And invasive plants, or weeds as we call them, throw that balance off. So native plants are able to stay in balance with each other, and we like that. And all plants need resources: sunlight, water, ground, space to grow. And our weeds and our invasive plants are taking up all those resources and leaving none behind for the native plants.
And the term weed is just kind of a subjective term. So a weed just means, it's like if you personally don't want something somewhere, it's a weed. So we call invasive plants weeds, but you know, if you have a plant that's not invasive, but you don't want it in your garden, to you, it's a weed.
Yeah. Oh, someone said, I think of weeds as plant bullies. Yeah, they're like crowd everybody out. I was gonna think if y'all could give an example of a non-native plant that we wouldn't prioritize over an invasive plant, like at one of our sites. We talked about probably a couple of them, but.
Yeah, I mean, so Hendrys Creek is kind of an interesting example because it was an old homestead site. And so we actually do see a lot of non-native plants at Hendrys Creek. One that comes to mind is called Bear's Breach. And I would say it's like, I think it has the potential that it could be semi-invasive, but it hasn't really moved around the property at all. And so we haven't prioritized it. But what you might do for those plants that are non-native but not invasive is that, I mean, if it's easy to remove, just go ahead and remove it. But you could also map it and monitor it and keep an eye on it. And then if you start seeing it growing more or getting more aggressive, then it's time to really take action. Yeah, that's my best example right now. If
And
you guys
some
have
of
another one.
Non-native plants still like provide more ecosystem services. Like there are native bees that will use that Bear's Breach, I think. So that's in a neighborhood setting, maybe why we'd just let it be. turn it into a container plant. Yeah, also a great option. We had someone plug Douglas Tallamy's presentation. It's on planting natives to support insects, those specialized relationships that we started off with talking about the milkweed and the monarch caterpillar. That is excellent. Thank you for putting the link in the chat. He also did a presentation just for the CNPS, our local CNPS chapter, so I can share that as well. And we talked a little more about those specialized relationships in our last Naturalist Talk, when we talked about birds and our native plants. All right, well, I think I covered everything. If I missed your question, please feel free to email me and I will pass them on. Thank you all for your engagement and comments and questions. I know we have a lot of collective weed knowledge in this room, so it's great to be able to put that all to work. And especially to Claire and Kristen and Nina for sharing about all the awesome work they do and the successes that we've had, things that kind of we're working on in the future, and just the exciting stuff that we see coming back up after we've not broken our backs, but really, in Nina's case, maybe, we work very tirelessly to get these out of our open spaces and make them into healthier ecosystems. All right, so that's it for us. Thank you again to the audience. I'll be sending out an email when the recording is up and with some resources, but just want to say thanks again and have a great night.
Thanks everyone for coming.